Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Chimera's Core Studio. Welcome to the show. Today's episode comes to you courtesy of Bill, who's been supporting this channel as a Brigadier General tier patron. I truly couldn't do this without the support from amazing patrons like Bill, so again, Bill, thank you so much. And today, Bill's gonna handle the intro for me.
Hey, thank you, Mitch. This is Cypress Bill out in the Bay Area. We love you, we appreciate you, and I can't wait to see this deck you got. Cause shout out to my boy Carlo, aka Vicente. I'm gonna whoop you with this, and it's gonna be much cheaper than your deck.
So today's deck tech's gonna be on an Omega level commander. Now, what exactly is an Omega level commander? Well, it's a commander that is incredibly powerful and a massive threat. And today's Omega level commander is Marneus Calgar, a 3/5 Astartes warrior that has double strike and it costs 2 white, blue, black. It has Master Tactician. Whenever one or more tokens enter the battlefield under your control, draw a card. On top of that, Chapter Master. By paying 6, we create 2/2/2 white Astartes Warrior creature tokens with Vigilance. So yeah, this commander is most definitely Omega level, and not because of, that ability to make some tokens. I mean, that is nice, and yeah, we can draw a single card when we make those 2 tokens, and of course, there are also ways that you can go infinite with that too, but that's not the focus. The focus is, every single time we make 1 or more tokens, we draw a card. And of course, this does not specify a few things. It doesn't specify, hey, this is only for, creature tokens or clue tokens or treasure tokens. Any kind of a token will trigger this. This also does not specify that this triggers only once each turn. It doesn't specify it only has to happen on our turn. Any turn, any number of times in a turn, in any kind of token, we're going to be drawing an absurd amount of cards with this commander. It takes very little time to get things set up until we have a value-generating engine that is incredibly hard to beat. Now, as we go through the cards on this episode, keep in mind that even though this commander is actually decently expensive itself, at around $7 or so, the rest of the deck is very, very, very budget-friendly, with every single card in it being less than $1. So it's a very budget-friendly build. Also, keep in mind as we're going through these cards, I'm going to be taking you through different tactics to show you how this deck works and how we're going to win with it. And if you are interested in this commander and interested in this deck, make sure you check out that deck list link in the description below. And now with all that said, let's jump into the deck. So, first up, there's Wayfarer's Bauble, which we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice to get a basic land into play tap. And of course, we've got some fantastic mana rocks that can help us out as well. Arcane Signet can tap for any of our colors, and Orzhov Signet and Azorius Signet can each filter mana by paying 1 into them. They tap for 2 of our colors. Next up, we're going to be running 2 Talismans with Dominance and Hierarchy. Each can tap for a color, so they can tap for 1 of our 2 colors, and they deal 1 damage to us. Moving on, we've got Felwar Stone, which can tap for any of our colors most of the time, and Cold Steel Heart, which does enter the battlefield tap, but we get to choose a color, and then it taps for that color. In a somewhat similar way, we've got our 3 Diamonds with Charcoal, Sky, and Marble. Each enter the battlefield tapped and tap for 1 of our 3 colors. But now that we've talked about ramping, well, let's talk about making some tokens. First up, how about Reef Worm, a simple 0/1 worm that has, when it dies, create a 3/3 blue fish. Then when that dies, you get a 6/6 whale, and when that dies, you get a 9/9 kraken. So essentially, this singular creature is going to be making us 3 separate instances of tokens, each one getting larger and larger, with the largest being a 9/9. So not only can this become a huge threat essentially, but it also can be a great way to draw, 3 cards. Speaking of drawing cards, next up there's Tivit Cellar Secrets, a 6/6 Sphinx Rogue with flying and ward 3, so this can be hard to deal with. And on top of that, whenever it enters the battlefield or deals common damage to a player starting with you, each player votes for evidence or bribery. For each evidence vote, investigate. For each bribery vote, create a treasure token. On top of that, while voting, we get to vote an additional time. Now, regardless of what everyone votes for, we're going to be getting a good amount of tokens, and every single time we do that, we get to draw a card with our commander. On top of all that value, from the treasures and the clues 2/2s that we're going to be getting. So yeah, we get to draw that card right away, and also again, this has flying, so we can get through pretty easily on at least one opponent most of the time, and yeah, then we get that trigger again. Speaking of a repeatable trigger though, there's Combat Calligrapher, a 3/3 that has flying, and Inklings can attack your planeswalkers you control. On top of that, whenever a player attacks one of your opponents, that attacking player creates a tapped 2/1 white and black Inkling creature token with flying that's attacking that opponent. So this can incentivize our opponents to swing elsewhere, and also it benefits us to swing at our opponents, and yeah, can draw us a card every single time. And speaking of swinging, how about Death Tyrant, which has menace, and it says whenever an attacking creature you control, a blocking creature an opponent controls dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. And on top of that, we can pay 5 and a black to bring it back from our graveyard to the battlefield tap. But yeah, if one of our creatures dies while attacking, we get a 2/2 zombie, and also, of course, we get to draw a card. And obviously the same happens when our opponent's creatures block too, which not only counts our combat, but also our opponent's combats as well, so keep that in mind. But of course, we've got plenty of other great ways to make a lot of tokens. Next up, how about some ways to replace our creatures and also draw a lot of cards throughout the game with cards like Blightmound, Field of Souls, and Open the Graves. Blightmound says attacking pest you control, get +1/+0 and have menace. So whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with, when this creature dies, you gain 1 life. Field of Souls is somewhat similar. It says whenever a non-token creature is put in a graveyard from the battlefield, you get a 1/1 spirit creature token with flying. And Open the Graves, again, very similar. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So again, when we have our creatures dying, we get to replace them, and also on top of that, again, we are going to be drawing cards throughout the game thanks to these token generators. But of course, we are not done just yet with these, or different instances of these. Ghoulish Procession's another great one. Whenever one or more non-token creatures die, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. This ability triggers only once each turn. Keep in mind, this counts anyone's creatures, not just our own, so though it is limited to essentially only doing this once each turn, I mean, with one trip around the table, we can potentially draw 4 cards thanks to this. Speaking of that, my goodness, can we draw a ton of cards thanks to Ogre Slumlord. It says, whenever another non-token creature dies, you may create a 1/1 black rat creature token and ratchet your control of Death Touch. So again, this counts not only our creatures, but when our opponent's non-token creatures die too. So yeah, this can make us a ton of tokens throughout the game and draw us an absurd amount of cards throughout the game. Speaking of which, perhaps the best of these though is Requiem Angel, because it says, whenever another non-spirit creature you control dies, put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. So other than spirits, this counts every single other kind of creature, and that includes creature tokens. And yeah, we've got plenty of creature tokens, and when they die, we can draw a ton of cards as well. Next up, another option might be with Nightmare Shepherd. It says whenever another non-token creature control dies, you may exile it. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a 1/1, it's a Nightmare that does other types. So if we want to save a creature kind of in a way of getting, an extra copy of it, sure, we can just utilize this, and while we're doing so, we are drawing a card. Or how about a creature that helps out in another way with Eloise Nephalia Sleuth? Whenever another creature you control dies, investigate. Again, Eloise does not care if it is a token or non-token creature, it counts all creatures. On top of that, whenever you sacrifice a token, surveil 1, so yeah, that's a nice additional benefit there too. And finally, let's talk about Valdarin Bloodcaster, a 2/1 flying vampire wizard that says whenever it or another non-token creature controlled dies, create a blood token. On top of that, whenever you create a blood token, if you control 5 or more blood tokens, this is transformed into Blood Bat Summoner, which can make one of our blood tokens into a 2/2 bat, so that's always nice as well. Now you might think we're done with our token generation, but we are nowhere near done just yet. Because on top of having ways to benefit from our creatures dying, well, we can also benefit from casting spells with cards like Murmuring Mystic, Tolerant Sky Summoner, and Trail of Evidence. Murmuring Mystic says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/1 bluebird illusion creature token with flying. Tolerant is very similar, but it's going to make us a 2/2 Drake with flying, and Trail of Evidence is going to make us investigate when we cast one of those kinds of spells. Regardless, whenever we are casting instant or sorcery and we have one of these in play with our commander, we get to draw a card. So yeah, the card advantage in this deck can add up in absolutely no time, again with just a little bit of setup. And we can take advantage of that card advantage with cards like Min Wily Illusionist, Ethereal Investigator, and Chasm Skulker. Min has whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 blue illusion creature token with this creature gets +1/+0 for each other illusion you control. This can get out of hand in absolutely no time. Again, drawing a second card in a turn is really no big deal for a deck that can make a ton of tokens throughout the game in various ways. And yeah, when we make those tokens, we draw cards. On top of that, whenever an illusion you control dies, you may put a permanent card mana value less than or equal to that creature's power from your hand onto the battlefield, so we can sneak a lot of things into play with this too. Next up, Ethereal Investigator can also help us out in multiple ways. It says when it enters the battlefield, investigate X times versus the number of opponents you have. So we get to draw one extra card with this when it comes into play, and on top of that, whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. And of course, drawing a second card is like second nature to this deck, which of course is going to benefit Chasm Skulker. It says whenever you draw a card, put a counter on Chasm Skulker, and when Chasm Skulker dies, you get X 1/1 blue squid creature tokens with Island Walk on the battlefield, or X the number of counters on Chasm Skulker. So this can get massive. Well, throughout the game, we're going to be drawing a ton of cards. It becomes a massive threat. When it dies, we make a ton of tiny threats that have Island Walk. So Island players out there, be wary. Now, as good as all these cards are, though, in my opinion, there is one that stands with the rest as the golden pig of this deck. So the golden pig of this deck, the number one card of our 99, is Nadir Kraken. It's a 2/3 Kraken that costs 1 blue, and it says whenever you draw a card, you may pay 1. If you do, put a +1 counter on Nadir Kraken and create a 1/1 blue tentacle creature token. This works fantastically in combination with our commander. Essentially, as soon as we draw a card, we can pay 1, get that counter on this, and make a tentacle. Then when we do that, we get to, draw another card thanks to our commander's trigger. Then this triggers, we can pay another 1, get a counter on it, make another creature token, draw another card, and you see where this is going. Essentially, we can just keep paying for it again and again and again as many times as we want to just basically draw a card and make a creature token and get a counter on this every single time. So yeah, the amount of value that this can provide us is pretty absurd, and that's what makes it the golden pig. Now, you might think we're done with tokens, but we're not. So, moving on, how about Curse of Disturbance? It's an aura curse that's going to enchant a player. Whenever that player is attacked, we get a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Each opponent attacking that player does the same. So we can incentivize attacks toward another player, and while doing so, well, we can make some tokens in the process. And speaking of incentivizing attacks, Rabble Rousing really can incentivize us. It has Hideaway 5, and whenever you attack with one or more creatures, create that many 1/1 green and white citizen creature tokens. Then if you control 10 or more creatures, you may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost. Getting to 10 creatures is absolutely no big deal at all, especially for a deck like this, and yeah, this can make us a ton of tokens throughout the game. Next up, how about Search the Premises, which says whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, investigate. So we're going to make a lot of clues with this throughout the game if players are attacking us, and again, every single time we make one of those clues, we are going to be drawing a card. Speaking of clues, next up we've got Thorough Investigation, which says whenever you attack, investigate. And on top of that, whenever you sacrifice a clue, venture into the dungeon. So now we get to also benefit ourselves by drawing a card when we attack too, because we're going to be making a token. Up next, there's Blessed Sanctuary, which says prevent all non-combat damage to be dealt to you and creatures you control, so that's nice, but more importantly, whenever a non-token creature enters battlefield under your control, create a 2/2 white unicorn creature token. So now when any of our creatures are just coming into play, we are going to be making more creature tokens, which draw us more cards. And we can even benefit from our lands as well if we retreat to a area. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, choose one, create a 1/1 white core ally creature token, or creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So again, make a token, draw a card, or again, if we want to actually take our opponents out and put them out of their misery, we can start pumping our creatures too and swinging out. Or, we can make some massive creatures with Ominous Seas. It says whenever you draw a card, put a foreshadow counter on Ominous Seas, and by removing 8 counters from it, we create an 8/8 blue Kraken creature token. Again, the amount of cards that we can draw with this deck is absolutely absurd, so we can get a ton of creatures out of this. Speaking of a ton of creatures, though, there's Thalis, Reverent Medium. It says at the beginning of each end step, create X 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying, where X the number of tokens you created this turn. So this can essentially double up the number of tokens that we are making, and yeah, that can be a very deadly evasive army. Finally, though, how about Replication Technique, which has Demonstrate, so we can actually copy it by letting an opponent copy it too. Create a token that's a copy of target permanent you control. This can be an incredibly valuable card, essentially taking the most valuable card that we have in play and making a copy of it, and also, of course, drawing a card. And yeah, if we want to make an extra one, we can. But next up, let's talk about some other ways that we can draw cards as well with cards like Village Rites, Read the Bones, and Siphon Mind. Village Rites gonna have us sacrifice 1 creature, draw 2 cards, and yeah, we've got a ton of creature fodder with this kind of a build. Moving on, there's Read the Bones, which is gonna have us scry 2, draw 2, and lose 2, and then Siphon Mind's gonna have each other player discard a card, and we draw a card for each card discard this way. So yeah, that's probably gonna be 3 cards in total. Up next, we've got Fact or Fiction, which is gonna have us reveal the top 5 cards of our library and fun separate those into piles, and we get 1 into our hand, the other into our graveyard. Res Behold the Multiverse can have us scry 2, then draw 2, and we can foretell for just 1 in a blue. And Chemist's Insight has us draw 2 cards, and it's got Jumpstart, so we can do it again. Or we can put a good amount of mana into Pull for Tomorrow, and X Spells can have us draw X cards and discard a card. And you find the Villain's Lair is pretty flexible. It says choose 1, counter target spell, or draw 2, discard 2. But when it comes to counter spells, we're also going to be running Deny the Witch, which can be actually a finisher for this deck as well. Counter target spell, activate ability, or triggered ability. Its controller loses life equal to the number of creatures you control, which of course can be an absurd amount. And then Negate can counter target non-creature spell, and then Rootborn Defenses can help us out a lot. It has Populate, so we get an extra copy of one of our creature tokens, and it says creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. So this can be a great way to protect and add to our army. Now, these cards can be great ways to throw a wrench into our opponent's plans, but we also have some more. So, moving on, let's talk about Despark, which is going to exile target permanent with mana value 4 or greater. And then Crush Contraband can get rid of both an artifact and an enchantment by exiling them, and Aethergale is going to bounce 6 target non-land permanents back to their owner's hands. Or we can just wipe things away with a flexible board wipe like Cleansing Nova. It says choose 1 to destroy all creatures or destroy all artifacts and enchantments. But perhaps even more flexible is Austere Command, which says choose 2, destroy all artifacts, destroy all enchantments, destroy all creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less, or destroy all creatures with converted mana cost 4 or greater. Moving on, how about some one-sided board wipes? Let's start things off with Hour of Reckoning. It has Convoke, and it says destroy all non-token creatures, so our tokens are going to be safe from this. But a true one-sided board wipe can really help us out with Ingarrick's Wake. It's control all creatures and planeswalkers we don't control. And then Cathar Commando is actually a creature that can help us out. We can flash it in, and by paying 1, we can sacrifice it, destroy target artifact or enchantment. And speaking of a creature that can help us out, how about Overseer of the Damned? It has, when it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature, and whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, create a tap 2/2 black zombie creature token. But another creature that can throw a wrench into our opponent's plans is Junkwinder, and this card is brutal in this deck. It's got affinity for tokens, so we can just pay blue essentially to cast it most of the time, and it says whenever a token enters the battlefield under your control, tap target non-land permanent and opponent controls. It doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. Our opponents are going to have a tough time untapping anything with this in play, and they're going to have a hard time surviving with Psychosis Crawler in play. It says whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life, so this can drain our opponents incredibly quickly with this kind of a build. But now that we've talked about every single non-land card in this deck, let's talk about the lands. First up, there's Command Tower, which can tap for any of our colors. Arcane Sanctum and Path of Ancestry can also tap for our colors, but they enter the battlefield tapped. Next up, there's Exotic Orchard, which can tap for any of our colors most of the time. And then Evolving Wilds and Timberwolf Expanse can both be sacrificed to get a basic land into play tapped. In a somewhat similar way, we've got Maestro's Theater, Broker's Hideout, and Obscura Storefront, which can each get us 1 of 2 basics into play tapped, and they're going to gain us 1 life. Next up, there's Ash Barrens, which we can basic land cycle away for 1, and Mirror Landscape, which can actually help ramp us. And of course, we're going to be rounding out this deck with basic lands with plains, swamps, and islands. And now that we've talked about every single card in this deck, let's talk about the price. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, even though our commander is about $7, again, every single other card in this deck is less than $1, so it's still a budget-friendly deck with an estimated cost of $41.52. And keep in mind that estimated cost actually includes basic lands at 10 cents a piece, so if you already have those basics, there's some extra savings for you there. And speaking of potential extra savings, you might be able to save even more by buying this deck on TCG Player and utilizing heavily played and damaged cards, which of course need a home too. Though do keep in mind that this estimated cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support.